went to Charlotte and went to school. Went to business school.
Is that Queens?
No, I lived out in the Queens section, but I didn't. It was Guy Air Business College that I went to.
What kind of courses did they teach?
What courses did I take or teach?
Well, no, did they teach? Which ones did you take?
I had commercial law, I had bookkeeping, I had shorthand, I had we had some math classes. In the meantime, Bruce and I were married, and I thought he was coming to Charlotte to get a job, but he didn't. So
What year was
I went
that?
to Chapel Hill.
What year was that?
It was 1938
How'd you meet him?
when I was working in Chapel Hill.
So you met him while you were working in Chapel Hill.
Hmm.
You met him while you were working in Chapel Hill, and you still saw him while you went back to Charlotte to take some courses.
Right.
And y'all got married where?
In Pineville, North Carolina. It's south of Charlotte.
Huh. What day?
What date? December the 24th.
Ah, Christmas Eve. How about that?
Yeah. That we were
1938?
1937.
37? And so did y'all head back to Chapel Hill?
Well, he went back to Chapel Hill because he was working in Chapel Hill, and I was working in Charlotte. I mean, going to school and working in Charlotte. But he decided he didn't want to go to Charlotte, so I went back to Chapel Hill and went to work for Poe's Garage. They were the Plymouth DeSoto dealers.
How long did you work there?
Until 1941, I guess. Yeah, 1941, when I came to, when I had a job offered in Sanford. So I came to Sanford and worked, and Bruce still stayed in Chapel Hill until he went into service.
How old were you when you got married?
I was 22.
Let me back up a second. Either back in South Carolina or in Cameron, did y'all ever do any trick-or-treating at Halloween?
No, not usually. The church would have maybe a Halloween party. I mean, the youth of the church, and it wasn't necessarily the youth. It was a lot of the singles, including Aunt Seal and Miss Lula Rogers and Miss Lucille and all of them. The singles.
So as kids, did y'all even know about the concept of trick-or-treating?
Yes, but then it wasn't as popular as it is now. You were very careful what you did so far as a trick is concerned.
Okay. Was any dressing up as monsters or witches or anything?
Well, to a degree, but not. I mean, maybe when you were in those parties, they would
Masquerade
walk through
parties.
the,
Okay.
they would walk through the cemetery. But so far as tricking was concerned, you just didn't do it, because that usually it composed of maybe things that were detrimental.
Well, I remember my father told me some stories about the biggest part of Halloween was the tricks, you know. I don't know if he was painting cows, but just, you know, just moving stuff. And
Well, of course, that's what I had reference to, and sometimes it was.
someone
it was
got out of
kind
hand.
Yes, it was detrimental, but Bob and Dick and them started to school. Well, Sister and Bob started there at Cameron, and Dick was in maybe a third grade or something of the sort, second or third grade. So they grew up with a group of children there in Cameron. But there were very few young people when we were coming along.
What about Christmas?
Well, we always had a Christmas tree, and maybe they'd go out on Christmas Eve and cut a cedar and bring it home, bring it to the house, and we would
So you always had a
decorate
cedar
so
tree,
forth.
right?
Huh?
Y'all always used a cedar tree.
Cedar.
Oh, okay.
Right.
You ever put any lights on it?
Well,
Or did they just decorate it
they
with
had
what?
they had a lot of tinsels and ornaments and things like that at home, and the electric lights were not as prevalent as they are now.
Uh-huh. So did you put the
And they would
tree
be,
in a bowl of water or something?
yeah, or in a bucket that was filled with sand or something of the sort. They
Well,
were,
that's
there
fascinating.
was always gifts for Mother and Daddy Loving that were given to them by their children, but so far as Santa Claus for us was concerned, if we hung a stocking, but maybe we'd get raisins and nuts and apples and orange and things like that. Very few gifts. Sister, I guess, had got more for Christmas than any of the rest of us.
What about the orange coconut cake? Where'd that start?
Well,
Was that a tradition that?
a coconut cake was always there, but not the coconut orange,
Oh, okay.
because that came,
So that was something special she
Yes,
made for
lady.
Christmas?
yes, coconut cake. There was always a coconut cake and coconut pies and mincemeat pies, things like that. Jello.
Why coconut?
Well, everybody just liked
Just something that she
coconut.
grew up with?
Yeah.
Huh.
Of course, you didn't have, coconuts weren't that easy to come by at that particular time, so it
And
was
it wasn't
a
canned that
special-
you could buy in a store either. So you had to go buy it, crack it, and
Right.
shave it.
and grated.
Uh-huh.
And they always had ambrosia.
Did you have a radio?
They had one of the first cabinet radios that came out, you know, one that sets so high.
Uh-huh.
Majestic.
When did they buy that?
I guess it was maybe in the early 30s.
So you were in high school by the time they bought the
Mhm.
radio.
Mhm.
Okay, so you You weren't near a radio when Orson Welles broadcast in '29 his famous Mars attack.
But everybody remembers that.
What do you remember about it?
Well, I think there was a lot of excitement and so forth and so on.
Was the radio nearby? It's October 31st, 1929.
I don't think they had a radio at that particular time, but they may have.
Well, what do you remember about the excitement?
Well, I think the family was the type that didn't get excited when something like that was going on. There was always a doubt in their mind.
Skeptical.
Yes, I don't remember there was that much excitement so far as family was concerned. Well, it may have been in 1929 that they got one, because Flint was not married at that particular time. He was living at home, at Cameron, with his mom and daddy. And Aunt Seal was there. And of course, the lady was teaching school, and she was not married. So they probably had one in 1929.
See, I mean, y'all heard the broadcast, and everybody's getting kind of excited about whether or not it was an actual invasion, War of the Worlds versus theatrical.
Yeah.
Do you remember anything about that night?
Not really, with the exception of there was a lot of conversation. That's about
whether it was real or not, and then after it was told to be a hoax, did Orson Welles get scolded or ridiculed a lot?
I don't think they ever forgot it. And I know, let's see, what was it? Loman Adler was very popular at that particular time, because I can see Daddy Love him now sitting near the radio. He was deaf. Had been deaf as long as I could remember, and I can see him sitting there listening to the radio with that ear bent to get every word that was coming through. And was the Grand Ole Opry popular at that time? It seems like it was, because there was some musical program, particularly on Saturday night, that they would all gather around the radio.
Any other programs?
Loman Adler was one of them, and I think the Grand Ole Opry was very popular at that particular
Any
time.
dramas like As the World Turns or The Shadow or anything like that?
No.
Newscast?
Yes. It seems that Calton-born, wasn't he popular at that particular time? H.V. Calton-born.
What about the stock market crash?
Well,
Did that raise a lot of interest?
I don't.
Would that have any effect at all on lifestyles down here?
Well, not that much, with the exception that everybody was doing anything they possibly could that would bring in a nickel.
Were there any World War I or Civil War veterans nearby or hang around that ever talked about their experiences?
No, not really. Uncle Ratty, Aunt Dolly's husband, was the only one that went over, the only member of the family that went overseas. But he was more or less with an engineering group.
In World War I?
Uh-huh.
She wouldn't let me.
Now, which one is that that's laying in there?
That's both.
Years off. But the War of the Worlds, the broadcast we're talking about, was 1939, not 29. So he'd been more closer to 15 or 16. But you might not have been in Cameron then.
Oh, I wasn't.
Okay. So you're probably more over at in Chapel Hill.
Yes, I
Oh,
was.
okay. Well, I thought it was more.
Yes.
It was further off. But y'all didn't have any effect from the stock market crash down there.
Not
That
all.
would be 29.
Nothing except the depression setting in
I was
from
gonna
it.
say, that's,
That's the biggest fact. There wasn't any money lost in the stock market.
But I mean, it didn't affect businesses or trade or stores or banks didn't close down or people didn't panic or I mean, was there much of an effect at all here in North Carolina or in Cameron?
I mean, they didn't have a bank, but the bank at Bass was, I guess, the only one. And that's enjoy radio so much.
I don't remember.
Was it the Grand Ole Opry?
Now, Mom used to enjoy the Grand Ole Opera
On-
out of
on
Nashville,
T-
Tennessee.
On radio.
On radio, yeah. Grand
Well,
Ole
I
Opera
think-
and
Loman Abner.
Lum and Abner, and Amos and Andy.
This is something different than Lil Abner, Lum and Abner.
Yeah, Lum and Abner were a couple of guys that ran a country store, and they called it the Jot 'em Down store.
Yeah.
They'd answer the telephone and say, "Jot 'em down store."
One time when
And
we
then-
were,
As though they were ready to take
Jot
a
it
list
down.
of stuff to jot down.
and Amos and Andy,
Yeah.
they were the programs, because I can see Daddy Lovin sitting with his hand up to his ear, listening to the radio.
I imagine you really loved that one.
Hmm.
I can imagine you really loved that one.
It was good. Amos and Andy were pretty good.
Yes.
There was no vulgarity in their programs at all.
Mm-mm.
Why did y'all wait till Christmas Eve to find the cedar tree?
I guess, Paul, because
I mean, like instead of the week before. Or,
Well, they didn't decorate as early then.
because the tree would dry up
and they just didn't
No,
decorate
they didn't.
back then like they do now
Uh-uh.
because people couldn't even afford to buy decoration for the tree. They had to make a lot of them.
popcorn.
No.
Tinsel? No.
Take strips of paper, maybe different colors of paper, if there was such, or they would use a red crayon and a green crayon, and glue it together and make a chain.
Uh-huh.
Pretty neat.
Like that.
But I remember that they always had tinsels there at home, as well as
Yeah.
some.
Once in a
As
while,
well as-
some of them would get some tinsel. The icicles like he
Right.
used, like he
Like
still
garland.
using them.
What about garland? Any special garland?
No,
No,
not unless it was one
That would be
that
the
you
popcorn,
made
I
yourself.
guess, that you string
Yeah.
together.
But sometimes they've used that, no, what in the world? Running cedar,
yeah, running cedar.
they might use so far as a wreath or a garland is concerned. Decorate the stairway.
But there wasn't much of that around,
You'd
because
have
it
to-
didn't grow too profusely down in this part of the country like it does up in the clay soil.
No Christmas Eve church services or Christmas morning church services?
It
Used
was
to be.
always on Christmas night.
Mm-hmm.
Christmas night.
And
Church.
they'd have a Christmas tree there at the church and a play, of course.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but,
Santa Claus would come, would be there.
and hand out bags of fruit and candy maybe
Okay, it's
For
a
the
church.
children.
for the children. Yeah, for the children only.
That's pretty nice at the church. Is it a nativity play?
Usually it was a Christmas play of some kind. And if they didn't have a program, well, it consisted of singing the Christmas carols and things like that.
What about Easter? Anything special there?
What?
Anything special at Easter?
They usually have an Easter egg hunt. That's when everybody would dye eggs.
And they were real eggs. They weren't candy eggs or glass eggs like you have now.
But did you hard boil them?
Yes.
Boiled them.
Yes.
Boiled eggs.
Okay, so you did do that.
They were boiled eggs.
What'd you color them with?
I'm gonna have to tell you that. I don't know.
I know that Aunt Seal would buy the dye. And sometimes they didn't color the eggs too well.
But colored your hands and
Yeah.
Right.
your clothes and all that kind of stuff. And then during the summer, did y'all have a swimming pool in a swimming hole in North Carolina like you did back in South Carolina?
Yes, they would take us to Cranes Creek or where was it down below Cameron?
That's Little Crane Creek. Go down that the trestle of the.
Not those two ponds that are back behind the house?
No, they
No.
weren't there.
No.
It's just the creek itself.
A creek being how deep?
Oh,
Maybe knee deep, waist deep.
Well, in some spots it would get up to your shoulders
Oh,
where it had dug in, gone around.
must have been pretty cold water.
Well,
It
felt
didn't seem,
good.
I was gonna say, it didn't seem cold
It felt
at
good.
that particular time.
Mhm.
So mainly the only kids swimming in the hole were just you six?
The only place other than the creeks like that, there used to be is Mackenzie's Pond out there close to Pinehurst. And the
Still
church
there.
used to have a picnic every summer,
An annual
and that's
picnic.
where we would go to have the picnic, is at Mackenzie's Pond.
So that's pretty far to walk.
It was then.
You didn't walk.
You didn't walk that far.
Well, as kids, how'd
But-
y'all get around other than walking to school?
The what?
How'd you get around other than walking to school?
Well, most of the time, there was an automobile of some description around. But when they would have those church picnics, and sometimes they would have it at Lakeview, somebody would, in the church family, would have a pickup, a flatbed truck. That's the way we'd go to the picnic.
So it wasn't much of a open bed wagon being pulled by mules or any kind of stuff?
Not
Or
at
riding
that,
the mules?
not at that time.
No.
And they wouldn't have gone that far with them anyway. They had a pair of horses there at Daddy Lovett's that walked many a mile and pulled a wagon.
That's the way we used to go to town occasionally when there's 2-horse wagon.
What kind of wagon? A seat with an open back end?
Yeah.
Well, we didn't even have a seat on that unless you took a board and laid it across the sideboards.
But you had some kind of harness to hook the horses up to?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Just like you see in the magazines of the horses with the harnesses on. You've seen my collar there at the house with
Yeah.
Hames.
Right.
That was their harness, and of course the trace change would be hooked to that wooden part of the harness there, and on either side of the horse.
But I just can remember when they had a 2-seat carriage there at Daddy Lovett's.
I never
Horse-drawn?
remember a carriage there.
Horse-drawn carriage?
Yeah. And there used to be an old black couple that would go to town on a horse and buggy, with a horse and buggy. They'd come right by the house there on the way to Cameron with a horse and buggy.
Now, the church you're talking about with the plays, is that the same one that has homecoming?
Yeah.
That same building?
No.
No, it was a wooden building back
Wooden
then.
building.
Same side of the street, same general location?
Same
Yeah,
location.
Same location.
So that cemetery across the street's pretty ancient then.
Yes, 'cause
It's got
our
some old history.
great-grandmother was buried there.
Huh?
Daddy Lovett's mother is buried there.
Oh.
And you may want to go down and film the cemetery.
Oh, you're right, I would.
Get 'em?
Huh.
But that pair of horses that was there, Mother and Daddy Lovin used to ride. One
Bareback or with saddles?
had a saddle. Sometimes they used just an old, what kind of,
Burlap saddle or something?
yeah, burlap.
Now, the boys go around in the summer with cut-off shorts and straw hats, like you see from Huck Finn.
Yeah.
So everybody had a hat and
Only we didn't have any cut-off shorts, we had overalls.
Right.
overall. What about the young ladies?
I used to wear overalls and a straw hat out in the picking dewberries.
Picking dewberries
Mm-hmm.
for breakfast or something like that?
No, for commercial purposes.
Oh, you sold them.
So.
Yes.
Mhm.
So you had a fruit stand up
crate.
there at Highway 1?
No.
Oh.
I'll show you someone in the Cameron book that I've got there at home.
What else did you pick to sell?
Cotton.
You had cotton on the land?
Yes. Cotton, tobacco, corn. Of course, the tobacco barn burned pretty quick after we came to North Carolina, so. And Daddy Lovin stopped raising tobacco then.
Didn't start back until about 36 or
Yeah.
7, somewhere
Yeah.
along that.
In the mid.
So Geraldine Stutts is his sister?
Who?
Geraldine Stutts, Grandma Stutts is Daddy Loving's sister?
Daughter.
No, daughter.
Daughter. So that was y'all's
Carl's
grandfather?
Carl's sister.